Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of How Did We Not Know That? My name's Jack.
And I'm Nat.
And before we get started, we just want to make a quick announcement. Again, we have How Did We Not Know That merch. It's our first piece ever. It's a cute little sticker. If you haven't seen the design, go check out our Instagram at HDWNKT. And if you're interested in supporting us, consider buying one. All right. Okay, go ahead now. What are you talking about today?
Okay, I am actually so excited for today's topic. Jack, do you remember when I was messaging you? I was like, I don't have a topic for this week. And you said, oh, you should talk about a person. And I said, oh, that's a great idea because I want to do something a little bit more lighthearted. The Japanese occupation episode was super depressing. Well, guess what? Okay, I'm talking about a person. Is it lighthearted? Not at all. It's going to be... Somehow, it's like... I think this person, today I will be talking about Fritz Haber. I think he is arguably one of the most influential people in modern history. I doubt a lot of people have heard his name though. And yeah, this is like one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard before. He's literally the reason you and I exist today. Without him, we might not be here. But his life story is one of the most complicated I've ever heard, and to this day historians still struggle to decide how to remember him. So today, Jack and my fellow listeners, as I tell you about the life of Fritz Haber, we're going to reflect on a very difficult question. When you judge a person's life, how much virtue is necessary to outweigh the sins? So with that in mind, let's dive into the life of Fritz Haber.
Oh my gosh, Nat, how do you find these topics? You find the most obscure topics I've ever heard of.
No, I'm actually so glad that you asked that question because that kind of segues into my next talking topic. Pretty much, I think half of the things I'm going to talk about in season 3 came from the book How to Hide an Empire by Daniel Immerwahr. I read it a year ago, but still so many things stuck with me to this day. I know I've plugged this book a bunch of times, but if you haven't read it, please do. And Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'm stealing your whole entire book. But, all right. So that's how I originally found out about Fritz Haber. In the book How to Hide an Empire, there's a whole section about his life and his impact on the modern world. His story just really stuck with me this whole time. So also, before I go on, I want to mention that most of my research comes from this incredible article written by Paul Barrick for Medium.com. It's titled The Tragedy of Fritz Haber, the Monster Who Fed the World. This is one of the most well-written articles I've ever read in all my research for this show, so please check out this article. He did an amazing job. So let's get into it. Fritz Haber was born on December 9th, 1868 in Breslau, Germany. He was the son of a Jewish merchant, and he grew up in a very small town. But from an early age, he was really interested in chemistry, and later in life, he would study it in university. And he was incredibly smart and successful. By 1890, Haber had become a professor of chemistry and electrochemistry at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And so especially, this is an incredible feat, considering that not only did he come from a very small provincial town, he was also Jewish. And so at the time, Jewish citizens in Germany did not have equal opportunities compared to non-Jewish citizens. So this is really incredible that he gained so much success. In 1901, he married an extremely brilliant chemist named Clara Immerwahr. She was the first woman in Germany to pass the rigorous national entrance exam for pre-doctoral chemistry. And she was also the first woman to just be awarded a doctorate in chemistry from a German university. And on top of that, she graduated magna cum laude. So she's extremely smart and extremely successful. So they're both really smart people, and they get married in 1901. After their son Herman was born, Clara had to balance her career and also like taking care of her son. Herman was very sick since he was a child, like since he was a baby, so she had to balance work and home life. Despite this challenge, she assisted her husband Fritz with his research and co-authored textbooks with him. Also, just a random side note before I continue. Fritz Haber, he was a close friend of Albert Einstein. He helped Albert through his divorce, and like they're all in the circle. So if that gives you like kind of a time frame, what's going on, like all these German scientists, yeah. So they're friends.
Wow. I didn't know Albert Einstein got a divorce. I didn't know he was married.
Yeah, I don't really know much about Albert Einstein's personal life, actually. But yeah, I didn't know he got a divorce, but yeah, apparently Fritz Haber helped him through it, and they were buddies. Smart friends.
Nice.
All right, so before Fritz Haber, people thought that the world population would peak at 1.5 billion. And after that, they would just face starvation. Like, there was only enough food for 1.5 billion people. So Germany had the ability to feed 30 million people with the amount of sunlight and land they had. So this means that the rest of the people would just starve if they couldn't find a way to fertilize the crops. I'm not a scientist, nor am I like a farmer, but yeah, crops need fertilizer to grow. And if you're trying to like feed a country, you're going to need lots of fertilizer. But how is fertilizer made?
Isn't it like cow manure?
Yeah,
No?
basically, kind of, yeah. So in the 1840s, a man named Justus von Liebig discovered that nitrogen was essential to plant growth. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into the details, but basically, the amount of crops grown is directly tied to how much nitrogen is provided. So you need nitrogen to grow a lot of crops. There's nitrogen literally everywhere. It makes up 80% of the atmosphere. There's 4 trillion tons of nitrogen gas. And it's actually the 5th most abundant element in the universe. So the problem wasn't that like, oh, there's not enough nitrogen to make fertilizer to grow plants. The problem was that, yes, nitrogen is in the air, but like, how do we extract it from the air? So at the time, it seemed impossible to create an energy source that was powerful enough to extract it because you had to break the nitrogen bonds, but it was super hard. So countries had to find nitrogen that was outside of the air. So they harvested it through seaweed, manure, and guano. Jack, do you know what guano is?
Isn't it bat?
Yeah.
Poo?
Bat
It's the same
poo.
thing in mascara.
No, it's not in mascara,
Yeah.
is it?
100%. I think it is.
Oh,
Because that was a
what?
big, there was like such a big uproar on it. Because they were like, guano is one of the key components of mascara.
I'm about to check my cover girl.
Maybe it's Maybelline.
See if guano's
Maybe
listed.
she's born with it.
Maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's guano.
Yeah.
So hello, everybody. This is post-recording Nat coming to you from the editing room. Just a quick fact check. No, that is a myth. There is no actual bat guano in mascara. The reason a lot of people thought that there was guano is because there is an ingredient that is in mascara that's called guanine. So the names sound very similar. Guanine is an FDA approved ingredient. However, it is derived from fish scales. So not as gross as bat poop, but still a little fishy. All right. Back to the episode. Jeez. Ew, that's so gross. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, guano. At the time, guano was like a really powerful commodity because that's like how they fed people. That's how they made their plants grow. So wars were fought. Lives were lost over guano. In 1897, Spain went to war against Chile and Peru over the rights to bird and bat poo.
Over the rights to use it?
Yeah.
Like, is it ethical for us to take their fecal matter?
So basically, like, there's like islands that, like tiny little rocks in the middle of the ocean that all these birds would flock to. Because guano is like either bird or bat poo. And so like the specific bird would like flock to the rocks, and then they would like
do their
they'd do their business on the rocks, and it would just like, that's the only place, because they're in the ocean, so it like all piles up on these rocks, and so people would come and like hack at all the dried guano and then like put it on the boats, and they'd be stuck there for months in like these rocks in the ocean that are covered in guano, and it's like hazardous to breathe, and it's just like really dangerous. But then they would bring it back and then put it in their fertilizer because it has nitrogen.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's guano. But
that's interesting. But then, so you're saying like they had to, there was like legal issues over it?
Well, it's like all these different countries were going to these tiny little rocks, and they're fighting over like, oh hey, like we're taking it, and then other people would be like, no, I want it. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Daniel Immerwahr also goes into more detail about guano in How to Hide an Empire, so another reason to read the book. So at the beginning of the 20th century, Fritz Haber discovers how to break the bonds of nitrogen and harvest it from the air. So basically, now he can pull nitrogen from the air and convert it into liquid fertilizer. So this is a really huge deal. In 1909, he shares his discovery with the world, and it's considered to be one of the greatest scientific discoveries in history. Like 100 million tons of nitrogen is created each year by using this method. Half the nitrogen in your body comes from the Haber method. Like, it's still used to this day. So the fact that he could create that he could harvest nitrogen from the air means that he prevented wars, he fed people, and it led to our modern age. Like, if he had never discovered this, like, we wouldn't have been able to grow past 1.5 billion. Like, people would have starved out. We wouldn't have enough food to feed people.
Yeah.
And, like, now we have so much nitrogen, right?
Yeah, that's so much more impactful. You're right. I guess there would have been wars over it.
Yeah.
We didn't figure this out.
Like wars over nitrogen that you can find outside of the air, and just war over food, and wars over
scarce
guano.
Resources.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Widespread starvation. Now I'm like, whew,
literally
we figured that out.
And like, think about it. If our population was capped at 1.5 billion, like, how much could we actually progress scientifically, like technologically? I don't know. I feel like,
yeah,
if that's always we could still make great discoveries, but like if we can only afford to let a certain amount of people live, like, that's just a horrible thought. Like, we literally can't.
That's a good question. Like, how would the pace of like our technological advancements slow if we had less people?
Yeah. But either way, like, so this is just an incredible discovery, and now we have billions of people in the world, and it's because of Fritz Haber. And because of this discovery, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1919.
Yay. Wait, how did Fritz Haber do it? How do you break nitrogen bonds?
It's like,
does he talk about it in the book?
If he did, I don't remember. In my research, it combines nitrogen from the air with hydrogen under extremely high pressures and moderately high temperatures, and then this breaks the nitrogen bonds. And so obviously this is an incredible discovery. And Haber's ultimate dream had been accomplished. Like, he brought glory to his country. He was praised for his brilliance. And even though he was dealt a tough hand as a Jewish boy from a small town, he had beat the odds and accomplished feats that were unthinkable to many other scholars who had many more advantages. Of course, this accomplishment took a toll on his personal life. His marriage to Clara was slowly falling apart as he spent more time away from her. And he ended up moving his family to the capital in 1911 and began hanging out with the upper elites of society. So very bougie. And this boosted his already massive ego and filled him with a great sense of pride. So yeah, he was very egotistical, and like he really loved himself, which, you know, that's an amazing achievement. So yeah, he no longer saw himself as a Jew living in a society that labeled him as a second-class citizen. He believed he was as important as any other German citizen, if not more.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, you should. You are.
Yeah, like, it makes sense. You made one of the greatest discoveries of all time. Now people can eat. And yeah, you know what? And you really did beat the odds. Like, so yeah.
Even if he didn't, you were just as good as any other German citizen, right? Like,
right? Yeah, like you should be praised
periods.
as equally as any other German citizen would have been. Like, you should be appreciated. So as Germany's population and economy grew, so did its ambitions. So flash forward to the Great War, which would later be known as World War I. In World War I, we have Germany fighting French, Russian, and British troops. And Germany sided with Austria-Hungary and Italy. So this is where the incredibly patriotic Fritz Haber volunteers to help the war effort. He realized that the same amount of energy he used to extract nitrogen could be powerful enough for making explosives. So if he reversed the process used to grow life, he could make explosives deadly enough to destroy hundreds of thousands of lives.
Oh, no.
Yeah, just wait. This is just the beginning. So, however, the Allied forces also had a steady supply of explosives. So he's like, yes, I made all these explosives. It's extended the war. It's like helped us stay in the war for a little bit longer. Germany didn't have to claim defeat, or didn't have to accept defeat so quickly. So his explosives let them continue fighting. But then Allied forces also have a steady supply of explosives. So his discovery for making explosives wasn't going to be enough to win the war. But Haber had another idea. The ammonia he distilled through the air using the Haber method could also be added to chlorine in order to make an asphyxiating gas, which would later be known as mustard gas. Jack, have you ever heard of mustard gas?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Like, I assumed he was gonna make some type of, like, poisonous gas now.
Oh, look at you.
No.
You're like, you were studying the
yeah, because it said he made ammonia, and I was like, oh, okay.
And then
I was like, and then you said, like, oh, the explosives weren't enough, and I was like, well, he does have toxic gases coming from the process, so.
You're like, maybe he'll use that. Yeah. He did use that, and so he helped create mustard gas. So Germany was just desperate enough to agree to this plan, because first he comes up, he, like, messages the war generals. He's like, hey, guess what? I can make a poisonous gas that can just wipe everyone out. And everyone was like, oh, like, should we do that? Is that okay? Like, there are still some rules in war, you know? Are
there rules in war?
At this point, they had the Hague Convention. There was the Hague Conventions in 1899 that outlined like certain rules during wartime, like what you can and can't do. And it would be updated later in 1907. But at the time, they were like, oh, I don't know if using chemical gas would, like, I don't know if that's a violation of the Hague Convention. They weren't sure yet. But they were, like, incredibly desperate. And so they're like, okay, fine, let's try this out. So Fritz's wife, Clara, she was a pacifist, and she publicly opposed Haber's work. She said that it was, quote, a sign of barbarity corrupting the very discipline which ought to bring new insights into life, unquote. So she really dragged him in public. And she cited how, like, the poisonous gas they tested on German troops killed the soldiers that they were tested on. So it's not like, oh, you're just going to injure troops. Like, no, you're going to, like, be killing huge amounts of people. And, like, that's extremely immoral. Yeah, and so Haber responds by calling Clara treasonous. And he says, quote, during peacetime, a scientist belongs to the world. But during wartime, he belongs to his country, unquote. So they have very different views. Haber at this time is incredibly patriotic, and he will do anything to help his country win the war. And so their marriage continues to fail further as he stands by his creation of mustard gas and pushes it for it to be used on the battlefield. On April 22nd, 1915, German forces released more than 168 tons of chlorine gas on 10,000 enemy British, French, and other Allied troops on the Belgian fields of Ypres. The gas is described as a slow-moving yellow wall. You can actually, like, just walk. If you walk at a brisk pace, you can, like, outrun it. But at the first, this is their first time seeing this, so they're like, what the heck? No one really moves. So as the gas reaches the troops, more than half of the troops are dead within minutes. So that's over 5,000 people. And so Sergeant Elmer Cotton, who was a Canadian soldier who was at Ypres at the first attack to use mustard gas, he actually survived. And this is how he describes the attack as a, quote, an equivalent death to drowning only on dry land. The effects are there. A splitting headache, a terrific thirst, a knife edge of pain in the lungs, and the coughing up of a greenish froth of the stomach and the lungs, ending finally in insensibility and death. Unquote. So, like, I won't, like, if you want to go into the details, it's really, it's a really gruesome way to die. And so Haber is watching this from the German side, and he's ecstatic to see the Allied troops fall. And for him, this was just a test run. This was not the only time he wanted to use this. He's later promoted to captain. A huge party is thrown in his favor. And so we're going to get into a bit of a depressive part. Yeah, this next part is going to be really sad. Trigger warning, skip the next minute and a half if you don't want to. We are going to talk about suicide, so please skip the next 2 minutes if this is difficult for some listeners. So at this party, Clara confronts Haber publicly, and they erupt into this really intense argument. She calls him morally bankrupt, and he accuses her of being an enemy to Germany. And this is really the breaking point for Clara. The two of them had struggled for years now, and she could no longer live by her principles married to such an evil man. So that same night, while Haber lay asleep in their bed, she took his revolver, walked to their outside garden, and shot herself in the chest. And it was actually Herman, her son, who was 13 at the time. He was the one to find her. And the next morning, Fritz Haber goes back to work directing more gas attacks. And sadly, Herman is left alone by himself to deal with the aftermath of his dead mother. Yeah, so it's very difficult.
So Fritz did he just know and then go to work anyway?
Yeah. Obviously he knew, his wife died, but then he didn't really take a break. And it's going to get even, it's not over yet. So, of course, this is extremely traumatic for any child. And so, after Herman immigrated to America in the late 1930s, he would also commit suicide. So...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think it's just really tragic. Just everything about it. And
was divorce not an option back then, I assume?
I'm sure it wasn't as popular. I'm not sure about the specifics, but obviously, like, Clara was having such a moral dilemma and, like, really struggling, and yeah. And so Haber says he was haunted by his wife's death throughout the rest of the war. So he said, quote, "I hear in my heart the words that the poor woman once said. I see her head emerging from orders and telegrams, and I suffer," unquote. So Haber did go back to work. I know people mourn differently. It still was really hard on Herman. I can't even imagine. Yeah.
It's complex. It's really complex. I think after a certain point, you can't just say, "Don't use my gas," because they'll still use it anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But he was a strong supporter of using mustard gas in World War I. Like, it's not like he was like, "Ooh, like, my genius, like, my invention is being used for evil." Like, he was really all for it and was pushing for it, actually. He was, like, lobbying all the army generals. So, yeah. So, meanwhile, the Allied forces are also quickly developing their own poisonous gas attacks against Germany. So the war drags on for 3 more years, and on November 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m., the Great War came to an end, and Germany was defeated. So 100,000 people had died on both sides from poisonous gas attacks, with another 1 million wounded from it. And millions more were killed by the explosives made in Haber's munitions factories. So he really had a strong impact and was responsible for his inventions, were responsible for a lot of lives. And so Haber, after World War I, he felt humiliated and crushed by Germany's defeat. And he tries to, like, obviously he had this insane scientific accomplishment. So he tries to pursue other accomplishments. He's trying to, like, one-up himself, but he fails. So later he tries to distill gold naturally dissolved in the ocean. Like, he wanted to produce gold from water. Like, he produced nitrogen from air. Now he wants to produce gold from water to make his country rich, but he fails in that pursuit. And so he's not doing well. And in 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, and Haber's life becomes even worse. The Nazis quickly forbid Jews from working in the civil service, although Haber was exempt because of his effort in World War I. But 75% of Haber's employees were Jewish, and they were all fired. So Haber took a stand, and he resigned. He was like, "You can't benefit from my discoveries if you're not going to treat, like, me as the same, you know?"
Yeah, well, if only he knew how much worse it was gonna get.
Yeah.
For Jewish people.
Well, yeah, it's gonna get a lot worse very soon. So Haber left Germany, feeling abandoned, and so he traveled across Europe. He ended up teaching at Cambridge, but he was actually shunned by his British colleagues as a war criminal because, remember, he was the one.
It was against the British.
Yeah, so he felt very ostracized. And while he was in Switzerland, his heart failed, and in 1934, he died alone in a hotel. And so he died alone, and at the end of his life, he regretted using his mind and discoveries for waging war. So he did feel guilty by the end. I can't imagine, like, coming to terms with the impact all that had.
That's like the biggest ethical dilemma we probably ever have, you know? You originally made something that was supposed to help and solve a global issue, and then...
Well, that's the thing is, like... And, like, the thing is, like, yes, like... He's like, okay, he made the invention of the mustard gas. But, again, like, he was a strong supporter of using it in the battlefield. So it's not like...
That's true.
He was just like, oh, no, I've been tricked. But it gets even worse. So by the time,
it's gonna
get worse. We're almost finished, but
okay,
we just gotta end with another really depressing thing.
What the heck? Okay.
By the time World War II began, Haber had been dead for a while. Many of his creations were still being used, though, after he passed away, including a hydrogen cyanide pesticide called Zyklon. When Nazis discovered this invention, they realized what they wanted to do with it. All they needed to do was change the formula a little bit. So chemists were asked to remove the smell from the gas that warned people it was poisonous. And so as Haber's deadly gas poured through the gas chambers in concentration camps throughout Europe, Haber's family members, friends, and millions of other Jews fell to their knees without knowing what had hit them.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Now, what the heck? This is like the saddest thing I've ever heard. It's a Monday morning for me.
I'm so sorry. This is like actually one of the most depressing things.
Tragic, yeah.
This is so tragic.
This is the saddest thing I've ever heard. Because I think what makes it extremely, obviously the war is horrible, but it's like when you shrink it down to a human scale, it's like, oh man, I can't imagine the like feelings, the complexities of grief, and
it's so complex.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like I don't know how we don't know more. Like, how have I never heard of this man? So the Geneva Protocol of 1925 bans the use of chemical and biological weapons in international armed conflicts. So now you cannot use mustard gas or any other chemical weapons. To this day, historians are still conflicted on how to judge Fritz Haber. Billions of people would not exist without him, and the world would not look the same. And yet, if it wasn't for him, World War I would have ended years earlier, and millions of people would have been spared a painful and gruesome death. So at the beginning of this episode, I mentioned Paul Barrick's article, The Tragedy of Fritz Haber, the Monster Who Fed the World. He did a beautiful job concluding the article. I'm just going to quote what he said at the end because I can't do a better job. So this is what Barrick has to say. Haber was not simply a German Jew. He was a human being. All monsters are, and all saints as well. He was creative and destructive, warm-hearted and pitiless. He fed billions with his research and rejoiced at the agonized deaths of thousands. He lived in luxury and died broken and alone, repentant of the evil he helped create. There is no easy way to weigh his sins and his virtues on the scales of history. Perhaps there's no point in trying. In the end, he was a man named Fritz Haber. And that's how I'm going to conclude one of the most depressing episodes, which I went into episode 3 thinking we need something lighthearted, and this is what I came up with. So I'm sorry to our listeners. I'm sorry to you, Jack, to put you through this on a Monday morning. But I read about this a year ago, and like to this day, oh my goodness, like I could not take this man out of my head. So there.
No, you did a great job, Nat. Thank you for covering this. It was very interesting. He's gonna be in my head for the next year now.
Yeah.
Wow, that was incredible. If any listeners have more positive topics, please email us at howdidwenotknowthat@gmail.com, because we really struggle to find happy topics, but we would like to be more uplifting.
Yeah. Episode 4, we need something happy.
Yeah, something fun, like the history of lollipops or something. I don't know. The history of the Tootsie Roll.
I'm sure there's some dark. There's
something
guano
bad in there, right?
There's guano in our Tootsie Pops.
No.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you for listening, everyone. We will see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.